Hey, title card! We did it! Alright, let's go. Alright, let's talk about the ups and downs of the Plucky Squire. This is a very interesting game. It's, I think the most important thing to point out is I've never played anything quite like it. The idea of something being a 2D and a 3D game has certainly been done before, but never quite in this type of package where you're like jumping in and out of books. At least I don't think so. It's one of those ideas that like seems like it's been done before because it's so... It's one of those things. It's like, why didn't anyone else think of this? You know. But actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I don't think that there's ever been like a storybook video game where you jump in and out of books. Maybe not exactly. And within that, there are some very interesting ideas. The combat and the core gameplay is nothing really special. It's nothing really to write home about. It's not like you have like a lot of combos or special moves. You have a couple of little different things that you can do, but it's very, very straightforward. But they do a good job of keeping that experience consistent between the 2D and 3D, and even like there's like 2D where you're going up and down, left and right, but then there's also 2D where you're just side scrolling. They mix that up a lot. And the combat, it's not like when you go to 3D, you suddenly have to relearn how to do the combat. They did a good job of like making it all very consistent. I think one of the other notable things about this game is that it's not just an action adventure game. Like when I first started playing it, I was thinking, oh, so it's like Zelda, but we're gonna do this 2D, 3D thing. And there is definitely some of that. Some of the enemies look like they're right out of Zelda, but it's a little bit more complicated than that. There are several times in this game, it kind of reminded me of like Nier Automata or some other games where it's like, oh, suddenly we're playing a twin stick shooter, or suddenly we're playing Pokemon, or suddenly we're playing, you know, a match 3 game or Punch Out, or there's all kinds of random mini games in this game that are, or a rhythm game. There's a ton of stuff like that. And so that does a really good and makes a job of making it the gameplay never really, as simple as it is at its core, the gameplay is very, very simple at its core, but it never really gets a chance to get old, because as soon as you would start to get tired of it, it changes something. There's something else that you have to do. Oh, suddenly now it's stealth, or suddenly like you have your weapon's gone and you have to do something differently. The game never really stays in one place for very long. And so because of that, even though there are some sections that are long, arduous, or what would be arduous sections, they keep it fresh by throwing in different kinds of gameplay. And there's a lot of different kinds. A lot. Like a dozen different kinds of suddenly, oh, you know, we're doing this different kind of game now. And it's almost reductive to call it a mini game, because it's kind of a big part of the gameplay. It's like a boss fight, you know? A boss fight I wouldn't really call a mini game. So I thought that was really cool. And the boss fights in this game are all interesting. They're not really very difficult until the end, and then they do get a little bit tougher. But they are, even the ones that aren't that much of a challenge are still a lot of fun, because they just throw a different kind of game in there. It's like, it's not an action adventure anymore. You're doing something else. And that's what the boss fight is. And it keeps it, they do a really good job of keeping it fresh and interesting. Another thing I'll say is that this game, this game came out yesterday. And so it's been out for just a little over 24 hours now, 36 hours, I guess. And it is bug free. Did I run into a single bug? Oh, you know, there were a couple of graphics that looked like they might be a little messed up. But it was nothing really major, and really actually nothing that I could say definitively was a bug. It might have been a feature. So good job, especially there's a lot that could have gone wrong here with all the 2D to 3D stuff. There's a lot that could have been messed up, and they did a good job of keeping it very polished. It's very, very polished. It's pretty much bug free, like 99.9%. Now, there are a couple of reasons that this game may not rank as high as it deserves, or as well as it might sound like up to this point that it would. One is that there is an issue with this game. So there are these little dudes that give you hints, as there often are in games like this, or you're at a place that looks like it might be a tough spot. You can walk up to this little person, he'll give you a hint. That's what he does. That's the whole job of this entity. And I find that every time there's one of those people, 99% of the time, there's one of those people, the hint's not really necessary. They say like, oh yeah, you got to move this block over to here. And I'm like, I knew that already. I thought you were going to tell me it was more complicated than that. You're like, you don't need to be here. And then there were like 5-6 parts of the game that I would look at and be like, I have no freaking idea what to do. And when I did eventually find the answer, I never had to use a walkthrough. I don't even know if there is a walkthrough for this game yet. I never had to use a walkthrough, but when I did eventually stumble on the answer, it was not a very intuitive one. It was, there were a few times it was like, that doesn't really operate within the rules that you've established for me. So it just didn't feel very intuitive a few times. That's when I could have used the guy, but every time that happened, the guy was nowhere to be found. So whoever was in charge of deciding where that little troll, the little hint person goes, they did a bad job because all of the places where he was almost were obvious. And there were several places that he could have been that he was not. And so I thought that was a little weird and a little frustrating. And as part of that complaint, some of the puzzles were not very intuitive, in my opinion. Most of them, 75% of them were fine. And some of them were even pretty tricky. But generally, the difficulty on the puzzles wasn't super high, except for this half dozen that just didn't really make a ton of sense. Oh, there's this one, and part of it was there was this problem I ran into several times. There are these little warp places that you use to get in and out of the books. Sometimes they don't show up until you are right on top of them. And it wasn't consistent though, because sometimes they would just be there, and sometimes they'd show up when you got anywhere near them. But sometimes they wouldn't show up until you were right on top of them. And so I would get stuck because I would think, well, I got close enough to that corner of the book that I don't need to explore that anymore. There must be some solution somewhere else here. And I would wander around for 5-10 minutes and then accidentally step into that corner of the book again. And it's like, oh, there's the spot. Oh, it's like, how close do I have to be? It's like, it seemed like it was inconsistent. That's a little bit of a nitpick, but it did bug me a few times. And it goes into the larger point of some of the puzzles not being very intuitive and therefore not really very good. You know, we talked about the combat just a little bit. The combat was real basic. When it came to the standard combat, there was a lot of different kinds of combat in this game, but when it comes to the standard combat, it was bare bones. And there's this system in this game where you can buy upgrades to your damage, or you can buy new moves, new combos, things like that. And there were like 3 in the whole game, 3 different like types of things you could buy, and none of them were very good. I found that when it came to just straight DPS, straight damage dealing, it didn't really make sense to use any of the special moves that I bought. It just made sense to just smash square. So, the combat could have been a little bit more complex. That would have been nice. Not that big a deal considering the kind of game and that there's so many other different kinds of combat, but it would have been nice. But more importantly, what you did throw in there wasn't very good. If I'm just trying to clear a room of enemies quickly, the only thing that really ever made sense was just to mash square. And the game gives you enough health that you can pretty much, because it drops off enemies, especially when you need it. It's one of those games that like doesn't give you health unless you need it. And I could just smash square, tank enemies, and then get health fast enough that I never really died. I have a death counter of 49 deaths here, but I think probably 4 5 of them was me actually just fighting and running out of health. Most of them came from fails in mini games and falling off of things or whatever, you know, like different kinds of deaths, insta kills. This was and some of the mini games and stuff. Actually, just dying in combat was very rare. And that's not a complaint that it's easy. It's a complaint that the combat was just so basic. So basic. It didn't end up being that big of a deal because there's so many other different things to keep you interested in this game. Puzzles, different kinds of mini games, whatever. But I would put that in the negative column. But overall, I did enjoy this game quite a bit. The only reason it's not going to rank like in the top 100 or anything like that is because this isn't really... It's kind of like Astrobot. Like, I played Astrobot a couple weeks ago, and I thought it was perfect. But it didn't rank that high because it didn't rank like in the top 100 because there's a ceiling for those kinds of games with my rankings. There's just any C-tier Souls-like is going to be better than this. And like, I'm going to enjoy that more, or horror game, or what, you know, survival horror game, or whatever my favorite genres, you know. So yeah, it's not going to rank super high, but there's very little that they could have done better. I think those just few things that I mentioned, but overall, A-tier game, very, very good. If I have friends that are into 3D platformers and 2D platformers, and 2D like action adventure games, like Zelda type games, I would definitely recommend this. It's fun. It's a fun little game. It's not some big sprawling adventure, but like Breath of the Wild or something. But for what it is, it's a tight little narrative that's fairly linear, but it's very good. It's very good. I enjoyed it. All right, last couple of things here. The bottom center of the screen says that we have beaten 85 games in 2024. And 532 since we started doing this in 2020. Those numbers are lying to you. We have now beaten 86 games in 2024 and 533 since we started doing this. Let's go. All right. Last order of business here. Plucky Squire, it's been fun. Thank you for, you know, thanks to the developers for creating such an excellent and interesting and unique game. But we are now going to delete you from our console and never play you again. Bye-bye. Appreciate ya.